You're listening to Artistic Finance, show 167. On today's show, we discuss theater producing with Broadway producer Rashad Chambers. Topics include skills necessary for producing, advice for early career producers, reasons why shows make it to Broadway, and why investors choose to invest with Rashad. One thing I forgot to mention in the interview is that Rashad is a Tony Award-winning producer. It might not seem important, but I'm clarifying because not every Broadway producer has a Tony Award. Thank you to Rashad, who gave me an undivided hour of his time, and thank you to everyone listening who is a Patreon patron. Conversations like this between a lighting designer and a producer don't happen very often, but in my attempts to demystify the business side of show business, they're important to have. During the episode, I talk about being a co-producer of A Christmas Carol. There is a bonus episode called How We Became Co-Producers on Broadway. It's the one and only co-producer credit Nicole and I have, and we discuss it in a 30-minute bonus episode, which is available to current Patreon patrons. I'll put a link to it in the show notes at artisticfinance.com/167. Or you can access it by becoming a patron. You will then get early access to episodes and access to bonus episodes and worksheets. Join at patreon.com/artisticfinance. Without further ado, let's get to the show.
You are listening to Artistic Finance, where we help creatives learn about the business of show business.
Welcome and thank you for listening. I'm your host, Ethan Steimel, and today I'm joined by theater producer Rashad Chambers. We're recording this August 2nd, 2024. The Summer Olympics in Paris are underway. And in Broadway news, Keanu Reeves and Alex Winter, known for being Bill and Ted in Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, announced that they'll be reuniting, but this time they're going to be on Broadway in the 2025-26 season, starring in Waiting for Godot, or Godot, because the director is Jamie Lloyd, who is British, and he's also directing this season's Sunset Boulevard, which opens in October. Rashad, have you ever seen Sunset Boulevard?
I have, actually. I saw it with Glenn Close about 7 years ago on Broadway.
Amazing. Do you like the show?
I do. I enjoyed it quite a bit.
It's one of those shows that I love the music, but I've never seen it. And the 1994 Broadway version ran for 2.5 years, which means to me, like, it's got to be a good show. But the one you're talking about only ran for 4 months. It was a limited engagement. And I kept walking by the theater and being like, I need to go see this show. And I never did. Maybe I'll see this version. Are you going to see this newest one?
Of course.
It's like a stripped down version, which I'm slightly disappointed about. But everything seems to be a stripped down version these days.
You saying you're disappointed means that you've never seen the Jamie Lloyd production.
That is so true, because somebody was just talking to me about A Doll's House, which I think that was a Jamie Lloyd production.
That was Jamie Lloyd as well as Portrayal, which I did with him, and you won't be disappointed, trust me, because
amazing.
He is American.
Okay, so that's what's going on. Rashad, I have to say that I am so excited to chat with you today because I've been wanting to have you on the show since 2021. And this May, you were in Phoenix for the new musical Mad Hatter, which has lighting designed by a previous guest of ours, Don Chang. And Don actually reached out to me because I was teaching at Arizona State at the time, and Don was looking for lighting assistants and programmers. And just in passing, she mentioned, oh yeah, it's Mad Hatter, and our producer is Rashad Chambers, which of course reminded me that, oh yeah, I need to get Rashad on the show. And we weren't able to make Phoenix happen because you were busy, obviously, but a few months later, and here we are. So before we jump into it, I'm going to give just the briefest of introductions for you and just say that Rashad is founder and president of Esquire Entertainment, and your latest Broadway production was Fat Ham, which was nominated for 5 Tony Awards, including Best Play. And of course, other Broadway producing credits include Ain't Too Proud, American Son, The Inheritance, Caroline or Change, The Music Man, and Top Dog, Underdog, and Betrayal, which you just mentioned. Rashad, so I've mentioned that you're a producer. What else should we know about you?
Oh, so many things. I'm an optimist. I love theater. I grew up in Pittsburgh. That was where I first was introduced to theater. I studied abroad in Spain. My
Oh,
favorite ice cream is mint chocolate chip.
yes. A classic. That's amazing. Yeah, I love the optimist part of you because I was on your Instagram and in your bio it says optimist. All right. So your creative personality here a little bit. What is a live event that you like to experience as an audience member?
Theater, of course.
Of
It's
course.
my first love. I don't think there's anything like it. Being able to experience theater, the good, the bad, and the ugly. I think we often learn a lot about ourselves and about society. So it's always been something that I have enjoyed. I really enjoy many forms of live entertainment, from dance to opera to symphonies, but I would say theater is my first love.
Do you have a preference for musicals or plays?
If I had to tip the scales, they would be in favor of musicals, but I am in favor of any good storytelling. I really have an eclectic taste. The shows that I've produced that you just rattled off have been all different genres. And I've been very blessed to produce new musicals, revivals of musicals, new plays, revival of plays. So I'm really into anything that's good storytelling, to be honest.
Amazing. I love it. All right. Financial question for you. Are you bad or good with money?
Of course, I'm going to say good.
You have no choice.
Better if I had more of it, but no, I'm good. I think that I'm better when I'm working as a producer or general manager because I am very prudent when it comes to other people's money. When it comes to my own, I could be better, but I'm good.
I love it. All right, so let's talk about producing, and I want to talk about Mad Hatter the musical, as that's a show that you are lead producing. But before that, I have a bunch of questions. And first one being, how did you get into producing?
Sure. Let me clarify one thing. I wasn't the lead producer of Mad Hatter. I was the executive producer of Mad Hatter. So there is a slight difference since we were talking about producing.
Amazing.
I got into producing because of my love of creating. I was introduced to theater at a very young age. While I wanted to be a lawyer for most of my childhood, I was always intrigued by the idea of taking something from page to stage. So I studied theater as a hobby, and I really learned every aspect of theater that I could. It wasn't until visiting New York in college and in law school that I started to understand what producing was and tried to put together a bit of I'll say a puzzle for myself of how I can take all of the things that I loved, including law, business, and entertainment, and turn it into a career. And so that's how I set out on my journey to become a producer.
So you were in New York working as a lawyer when you got into it, or was this something that you? I guess like how old were you, or at what point did you first start producing?
I'll clarify by saying I moved to New York with the goal of being a producer. And so I basically did them in tandem. I was lawyer by day, producer by night.
Still to this day, are you that way?
No, thank God. No, I'm producer by day and night now, thankfully.
Amazing. I love it. All right. So what skills do you have? Because you've produced quite a bit, so I feel like you're good at it. But what skills do you have either from being a lawyer or just your own life or things that you've learned that make you good at producing?
I think that my background and education have given me a lot of skills that make me a good producer. I mean, one, communication skills are very important. Being able to understand how to communicate and or talk to different people in different ways, from creatives to designers to investors, to other producers. It's very important. So communication, both written and oral, grace and patience is really important as you are navigating a lot of uncertainty and everybody is showing up in their own way. Some things you're aligned with, some things you're not aligned with. So I think those are important things. Fundraising is an important skill, and just having a creative vision. While you can hire the best director, the best writer, the best marketing agency, the best press rep, if you as the producer and as a leader of the production does not have a vision for what it should be, the show is not going to be successful. So those are a bunch of things that I bring to the table as a producer, and I think that they're really important to be successful in the craft of producing.
Yeah, that's amazing. Also, the creative vision. We had director, choreographer Sergio Trujillo on the show. That's something about him is he's just like a leader and has a vision. And that was something he said. He's like, because I said, like, how are you so good at leading? And he said, well, if you have a vision and you communicate that vision, everybody can get on board.
Yes, and not everybody is a leader. And I think it's really important to understand what your skill sets are. Like I started off my career as a co-producer and then graduated to being a lead producer. Not everybody should make that leap. And I think it's really important to know yourself and know what you bring to the table in order to be successful.
You mentioned you learned a bunch and you had an eye on producing, so you were trying to learn as much. Are there any resources that you use that helped you learn about it? And I'm thinking like Ken Davenport, he sort of has mastermind groups he puts together. Heather Shields teaches classes at something called the Business of Broadway. And then just using Scott Rudin as an example, if you look back at his credits, he was a casting agent or director or something like that. So I feel like he got into the industry and learned it that way. And I'm curious, how did you learn?
I learned by doing first and foremost, but I really enjoyed reading Donald Farber's book From Option to Opening. That was a really great resource for me. And then before the Commercial Theater Institute was as prevalent as it is now, well, I guess they're on hiatus now, but as prevalent as they were, when I first moved to New York, the Broadway League had a program called the Producer Development Program, which was for aspiring producers. So I joined that. I did a 3-day CTI course, and then I just started producing. I just started being in the trenches and sort of learning what that entailed and started working on new pieces of theater, either plays or musicals that I optioned, or working on concerts or off-Broadway shows or off-Broadway shows. I think it's important to just really dive in and learn as much of the craft as you can. And that's what I did.
Amazing. That Broadway League thing that you did, what was the name of that again?
It was called the Producer Development Program. It doesn't exist anymore. It's now been folded into the Commercial Theater Institute. CTI, when they were really up and running, they offered a 3-day course as well as a 14-week course that they offered once a year. And then they also had a summer course that happened at the Eugene O'Neill.
So now, finance side of things. In my brain, the majority of a producer's time is spent talking with investors. Is that true? Or a better question is, for your producing work, what are sort of the different tasks that you have to complete? And what is the breakdown of time that you allocate to sort of each of those things?
Well, your first question depends on what kind of producer you are. So if you're a lead producer, you're working on everything. So you're working on raising money, you're working on leading press meetings and marketing meetings and hiring people, all of those things. If you are a co-producer, 90% of your time is raising money and talking to investors. If you're an executive producer, you're not raising any money. You're really just working as sort of the right-hand man of the lead producer and helping sort of shape the vision, helping run the day-to-day of the company. So it really depends. But because you specifically asked about me, I'll use Fat Ham as an example where I was a lead producer and I had 2 producing partners. I worked on that show for about a year of my life. And I would say of that year, probably about a third of it was raising money. The other 2/3 were figuring out how to transfer the show from off-Broadway to Broadway. It included hiring the entire staff from general manager to marketing agency to press rep, to getting a theater, to creating the key art, to creating a title treatment, strategies around the timeline to launch and when to put tickets on sale. And then the day to day of the show, running of the show. What does it take to sell tickets, to get butts and seats? Where do we discount? Where do we not discount? How do we make sure that everybody knows where they're supposed to be at a particular time? Are we doing special events? Are we working on strategies to get our actors interviews? We were blessed to get 5 Tony nominations. So figuring out all of the logistics around Tony Press Day and Tony Luncheon and interviews and all of those things. So talking to investors is a big part of it. But as most people know, I think that whatever your budget is, that money has to be raised by opening night. So once the show opens, you're not talking to any investors. It just comes down to managing the money and making sure that you're able to meet your operating expenses each week. And then the rest of the time is really spent on keeping the show afloat, making sure that you're having the right synergy between press and marketing so that people will be excited to come see the show.
Yeah. With Ham as an example, 1 year doesn't actually sound like that much time to me for like being a lead producer on a show. At what point did you join that show? Were you there from the off-Broadway version?
No, I wasn't involved off-Broadway. I saw it off-Broadway, but I didn't get on board until about August of 22. And so we spent August to November-ish doing sort of pre-pro and hiring all the people that I mentioned. And then we announced, I believe, in November. Then we started rehearsals in February, previews in March, opened in April, and ran to July. So it was quick, but I was already sort of a built upon entity when I came on board. So if I had started it from scratch, it would, of course, have been a lot longer.
Yeah. Amazing. A third of it was raising money. And then you said like half the time was moving it from off Broadway to on Broadway. And then the remaining time was sort of the day to day. That's sort of the breakdown.
That's correct.
Okay. And then also presuming that you have investors investing in your shows, why do people invest with you?
Some people invest in my shows because they're investing in me. And some people invest in the shows because they like the show. Everyone invests for different reasons. And the success to fundraising is understanding why that particular person you're talking to may potentially want to invest in the show. Some of it may be because of you. Some of it may be because of the subject matter of the show. It may be because of the star that's in the show. It may be because the numbers are really great and they think that it can make money either on Broadway or beyond. That is the critical question in assessing who you're approaching, because everyone invests for different reasons. Some people love plays, some people love musicals, some people only want star-driven things. So it really just depends, but I found that my investors have come on board for a combination of all the things that I just mentioned.
Yeah. Now, when I think fundraising, that sounds like a horrible task to me. Is that something that you're good at or you enjoy doing maybe?
Those are two different questions. But I'll say yes to both. It's a skill set just like anything else. I think in order to be able to be somewhat decent at fundraising, you can't be afraid of no. You can't be a producer, either co-producer or lead producer, without raising money. It's just a necessary evil. So if that's something that you want to do, you have to do it. And I think it's just a conversation. I mean, what I learned really early on is that there are people who want to be in this world and want to be involved in projects. And so you're giving them an opportunity to do that. You know, a lot of my friends who invest in my shows are quite successful in the business world or the legal world, and they have their stocks and they have their 401ks and they have this and that, and they want to diversify a little bit. And so if you're giving them an opportunity to be a part of a production that, is risky, but can make money. And they get to be a part of something cool and go to an opening night. I think that there are a lot of people who are willing to do that and are excited to do it because most people work crappy jobs that they don't like. And so to be able to go to a nice event in a suit and be able to rub elbows with Bernadette Peters or Alicia Keys, that's very exciting.
Yeah. Since it sounds like it's all just a conversation and you start a conversation, do you go seeking investors?
I just snap my fingers and all of a sudden, people just line up. It's a combination. I mean, sometimes, most of the time, I'm seeking out people. I will have a show and I'll think about who in my world may be interested in it. And then from there, I approach them. Sometimes people approach me when they hear that I'm involved with something, but most of the time it's me reaching out to others.
Amazing. And can I ask about Esquire Entertainment? Or I guess just what is that? Like, do you produce through Esquire Entertainment or are you producing separate from that?
It's a little bit of a complex question. Esquire Entertainment is a company that I founded to manage talent as well as develop and produce theater, TV, and film. I tend to be credited as a producer as an individual, but if I am producing a project, particularly if I'm leading a project, I will use Esquire in my agreements to give me an added layer of protection because Esquire is a limited liability company. So by having that, if there was an issue with the production, they would go after Esquire and not me individually. So it just allows me to keep a roof over my head. But I haven't done any productions where it's been, Esquire Entertainment presents. So I mostly produce credited as my own name, but I will use Esquire in agreements again to give myself that protection.
Got it. Okay. Also, something I left out of your bio is that you're a founding member of the industry standard group. So if you would, what is that? And are you still involved? And do you incorporate any of that in your producing?
The industry standard group is an entity that was created by me and 7 other producers to be able to sort of lower the thresholds of investing and producing in commercial theater, as well as provide access and education on what it means to be a producer. So many times when people are interested in commercial theater, there are certain barriers to entry, mainly being an accredited investor, which means you have to either earn a certain amount of money or own a certain amount of property to be considered a savvy investor by the SEC. That often means that the minimum that you can invest is $25,000. So we're trying to find ways for stakeholders to be able to get in at a much lower amount, which has not been done before. So I've been working with my co-founders for about 4 years now to figure out a way for this to happen. Very much, we meet every single week, and we are making the appropriate steps to be able to start investing and producing in shows very soon.
Amazing. Okay. Yeah. Because I was going to say, has it been successful? Have you been able to lower the barrier?
Well, we've been able to galvanize a large group of people who have supported the entity. But in order for us to be able to take in both accredited and non-accredited investors, we have to raise enough money so that the entity itself becomes credited in order for us to then invest and produce shows. So we're not quite there yet to be able to invest in shows, but we're getting there in terms of the amount of money that we've raised.
That is so brilliant because I feel like that is like the huge barrier to entry is the accredited. So you're sort of saying industry standard group could become accredited and then other people who aren't could maybe link to that and be able to go in.
That's correct, because otherwise it's so much work for a producer to deal with all the extra paperwork that you would need to allow non-accredited investors, which is why no one does it. But if they were to come through us, we as an entity would be able to be the accredited investor. and, save everybody a headache and be able to, but also at the same time, be able to have, all of these people come through our umbrella to understand and be able to go through that process so that when they do become accredited, then they can do that on their own. So it's about providing not only the opportunity, but also helping educate and provide access, helping them understand how to read and analyze offering documents, understand what it means to invest in a project, getting to know lead producers and co-producers that are in the industry who are doing shows every season. So it's really a bigger mission to be able to create more opportunities for everyone, but specifically people of color who oftentimes are not invited to have a seat at the table. When I started producing on Broadway in 2018, I can count the number of, specifically Black producers I may be able to get off of one hand, but definitely not two. And now there are a lot more producers who have entered the industry, and we want to increase that. We want the diversity of producers and investors to reflect the amount of actors and directors and designers, et cetera, so that we can also make an impact on the business side.
I love that. And I'm also interested in it because my one co-producing credit was for Christmas Carol, Broadway 2019. My goal with that, like you said, that's 90%, 100% fundraising, really. My goal with that was like, I'm a lighting designer. There's so many lighting designers that I want to be able to invest in shows, but they're not accredited. That was like, my goal was like, how many lighting people can I get to invest in a show? And so that's why I'm also interested in the industry standard group. If you can figure that out, which you're working on, it's pretty impressive.
So you're a producer. You say you're not really a producer, or you're not a producer, but you are.
Yeah, but it's well, I'm actually, because of that, I want to ask this next question, because that show, all the investors lost their money. And so now I'm selfishly asking these other questions. So with producing, there's a lot to it, like why you would produce a show. There's awards, there's artistic merit, there's notoriety, all these things that you mentioned before of like why people invest in a show. But one of the big things is money and recoupment. What is recoupment? And for anybody looking to invest in a show, what are possibly some signs that a show might lead to recoupment?
If we all had that answer, every show would be successful. Recoupment means making all of the money back that it took to get the show up and running. So if the show has a budget of $7 million, if the show makes $7,000,001, it recoups. In terms of your second question of what are some sort of signs that a show might recoup or maybe financially successful, honestly, there's no algorithm. You can look at something like Hamilton. If you would have said, 15 years ago, I mean, people laughed when he said, I'm making the show about the founding fathers and it's going to be told with people of color and it's all going to be sort of hip hop infused. No one would have thought that would be successful, right? Mirror that with something like Pretty Woman, which is like a acclaimed film that became a Broadway musical, ran for a year, but flopped, didn't make money. So I think that Broadway is changing a lot. And it seems like people are more interested in either star-studded productions or the lightning in a bottle production that feels unique and special. So the latter example I can give you is O'Mary. That seems like lightning in a bottle, a successful off-Broadway run that has now transferred as a limited engagement, was supposed to be 10 weeks and now has already extended to November. A star-driven show like Sunset Boulevard seems to be highly anticipated. Merrily We Roll Along recouped, because of Daniel Radcliffe and Jonathan Groff. So you can look towards subject matter. You can look towards star power. You can look towards sort of it having a low budget or low running costs. Those things alone don't mean that the show will recoup, but they may have a better opportunity to recoup. But again, none of those things matter if you don't have good leadership and a great captain of the ship leading the charge and being tapped in every single day to understand so many things, understanding who the demographic is, understanding how to market the show, understanding how to do dynamic pricing so that if Wednesday is a really slow day, knowing when to discount and when to not. Or if Saturday is a really great day, understanding like when you can bump up a ticket by $10 or $20 and see how that has an impact on your overall sales for that week. All of those things go into the day-to-day running of a show, which is why you can have these longer running shows like Hamilton or Wicked and still have people lined up around the block to see them because there was some smart producing and they found their audience and the demographics that want to come back again and again and again.
And I was looking at Playbill today about shows that are coming up, and one of them is Our Town. That's one where I look at it and I'm like, well, there's a number of people in the cast, but usually the scenery and the lighting and all that is like super simple. And so in my brain, I'm like, well, maybe it could make money because of that. And then also Waiting for Godot, I'm like, well, there's only I guess 3 people in it, but they're also very famous people. So maybe they have to get paid a lot.
I don't know what those numbers will be. If I had to guess, I would say that Waiting for Godot is probably going to make money and Our Town is probably not going to make money.
I'm going to check back in like a year and a half and see if one of them recouped or not. Speaking of me being on Playbill, there currently are 24 shows that are listed as upcoming this season. And I'm seeing shows coming to Broadway all the time. And the next question is a selfish question, as all of them are, because I have a little bit of a jealousy when I see all these shows that transfer to Broadway, because I've designed lights on countless shows and none of them so far have gone to Broadway. So Rashad, just curious what your thoughts on this are. What is the top driver that takes a show to Broadway? Not saying to make money necessarily.
It really depends, to be honest. Some of it is demand. Some of it is ego. Fat Ham was on Broadway because people wanted it to be on Broadway. It was initially just meant to be an off-Broadway production, but because it won the Pulitzer and received rave reviews, commercial producers started circling it and saying that the show should have a bigger life. Job is on Broadway right now because it had 2 successful off-Broadway runs and a show pulled out of the theater, and so there was a space available. Some of it is because they were able to get a big star. Some of it is because the producer has a big ego and doesn't want to just have an Off-Broadway Alliance Award, but wants a Tony Award. There's a lot that goes into making those decisions, and I think that each show makes its own decision for different reasons. Some of them are smart decisions, and some of them are not.
And is it always the producer that is the reason why it goes? Like, I know you're saying star or something, but even if you have a star, right, you need a producer.
It's the producer and it's the producer's relationship with theater owners that really helps get it across the finish line.
All right, so now let's talk about Mad Hatter, the musical, which we've learned you're the executive producer on. That premiered down in Phoenix this spring, so you hopefully know the show, at least from semi-early stages to potentially Broadway. I don't know if it's planning a Broadway run, but I would hope or think. So are you executive producer a lot? And how does that differentiate from you being a lead producer?
I've been an executive producer a handful of times on developmental projects. That was my first time being an executive producer on a full production. And I worked on that show for about a year as well. It really depends on the production, but I will say oftentimes people will hire an executive producer for one of 2 reasons. The first reason is that the lead producer may have a bunch of shows that they're working on at the exact same time, and they're not able to give the show the full attention that it needs to do the day-to-day and be in every single meeting. I will say like Scott Rudin was an example of that. He used to do sometimes 4 productions in one season. So he will often have an executive producer that can be his sort of right-hand man and be able to be in places that he wasn't. The second reason is sometimes you have a lead producer that has the time, has the ability to raise money, but maybe doesn't have the theatrical experience to run a show. A current example of that is Hell's Kitchen. Alicia Keys is also the lead producer of her own musical. And so she brought on an EP who knows the lay of the land, understands Broadway, and that can be sort of that resource for her and her team as they're navigating something new. My work with Mad Hatter was in line with the latter. The producer comes from the business world, has some theater experience, but doesn't have a lot of experience with musicals. So she wanted somebody who understood that world and had certain connections that could help build a bridge for the production. With Mad Hatter, I helped sort of develop the show. I also helped introduce the team to a lot of different players that ended up working on the show from the run at the Herberger Theater Center in Phoenix. And so I did all of those things. It's still very much developing. There will likely be another production before trying to bring the show to New York.
And when you said you were there for its development, but it's still developing, how early on, or what does that mean? Like, was it written yet?
Yes, it was written. I had a meeting with the team in January of 23 about coming on board. And then they did a concert version of the musical in Montreal in April of 23. And then I think I came on board right after that in early May. So it still is developing, but it's developing in stages. Everything from the time that I came on board in May of 23 until May of 24 was about gearing up for the Herberger production. So there was script development, there was casting, there was hiring the director, there was hiring designers, all of those things that went to the Herberger production. Now, the next phase would entail taking everything that we learned from Herberger, enhancing the script and the score, and then figuring out what that next production will be and then gearing up for that. So it's like just kind of building the momentum and kind of enhancing each step each way.
That next step, is it we do it, we see where we are, or is it like, we hope that could be an out of town and then we're ready to go to Broadway or something like that?
I can't speak on that right now because it's still very much in motion, and I don't want to say something on behalf of the lead producer that she doesn't want to be shared. But I will just say that Herberger Theater Center production in Phoenix was construed as the world premiere. There will likely be a subsequent production or two. And then the plan is to bring the show to Broadway.
Cool. Well, break a leg with all that. I hope it I hope it gets there and it's wildly successful. Cool. Okay. I have more questions, but I don't know how to just ask simple questions. So I'm going to ask another two-part question. Of all the things you've produced, which has been the best experience for you? Or what would be a show, or what type of show would be like your ideal producing?
I've had so many amazing experiences, but if I had to just say one, I would say the revival of Top Dog Underdog was probably my favorite experience. I worked on that show for a little over a year as well. I just had a great time. It was led by the brilliant David Stone, who's the lead producer of Wicked. And I got to work with Kenny Leon as the director, and Susan Laurie Parks as the writer, and Corey and Yaya as actors, and amazing producers like LaShawn, Deborah Martin Chase, and Mark Platt, and got to have a very big seat at the table, working on that show every day. And then to top it off, we all won a Tony for Best Revival. So that was such a joy and just such a fond part of my producing career. And I'll never forget it.
And was that like a happy accident, or would you go out of your way to sort of seek stuff like that out again?
It wasn't an accident. David Stone handpicked me to work on the show with him. I would definitely seek out things like that again. And I'm hoping to work with David again very soon. In terms of your other question, I just want to produce good work. So one thing that I haven't done yet, which is happening soon, is I've never worked on a show from scratch that made it to Broadway. like from the beginning. I have a show that I've been working on for a long time that I think will come to Broadway next year. But that would be one thing. And I've not commissioned a piece myself, worked on something like that from the beginning. So those are sort of two things that I would like to do. Otherwise, I'm sort of just open to really cool opportunities. I want to work on good shows and I want to work with good people. Those are sort of my two criteria.
I love it. I love it. Have there been any moments, because what I'm picking up is that you wanted to do this, you've always worked to do this, and it was sort of like you just kept doing it and kept doing it. It's sort of like a slow buildup, and it's just a slow, you're in it for the long haul. Have you made any mistakes? Is there anything that other producers or newer producers could avoid by something you've done?
That's complex. Are there mistakes that I've made? 100%. Were they easy things that I could have just like unrung the bell? No. But are there helpful hints that I can give to other producers? Yes. First and foremost, financial stability is really important. And I don't think that people about liability enough when it comes to producing, specifically lead producing. You don't have to be a millionaire to be a producer, because a lot of times you're raising money, but you do have to have access to money. And you do have to understand, if you're the lead producer of a project, you are responsible for that show in every regard, including financially. So if the show is not doing well one week and you're not making your expenses, you have to either put in that money yourself or you have to go out and find that money. We oftentimes only look at the glitz and glamour of producing. We look at the Tonys and we look at this and that and the opening nights, but we don't think about the shows that are really struggling and have to get priority loans and who has to pay that back and what that does to not only the producing team, but to the investors. Don't get yourself in the situations that you can't get out of. Number one, when you sign those documents that you are the lead producer, you are taking on all the responsibility and liability that come along with it. Do things that you're really passionate about. Do things that you can sell. Be true to your art. Some people are able to sell lies and do things that they don't believe in, but I believe that it really shows if you really don't care about something. So pick projects that you are really passionate about. Know who you're getting into bed with. Know who you're working with. Does the lead producer have the artistic integrity that you have? Are they going to make the decisions that align with the way that you would make them? Because at the end of the day, they are the ones that are making all the decisions that are sometimes not the best thing for the production. Even little things like, do we do a mailer? Nowadays they're so expensive and a little prehistoric, right? Could we be putting that money into a digital spend or to some other form of advertising as opposed to mailing a postcard that ends up being thrown away? Are you taking a New York Times ad out for no reason? Like, I remember a lot of the investors on Hello Dolly were kind of scratching their heads because they didn't understand why Scott Rudin had a sold out show, but kept taking out these ads in the New York Times, and they weren't seeing as much profit return to them, even though they were making $2+ million every week. So there's a lot of things as a new producer, as a young producer, that you have to think about when you sign on board to work on a show, and don't get seduced by the possibilities. Really ask the prudent questions. Look at the numbers. Like, if it says this show will make money, and then the asterisk says, if we run for a full year and we're sold out every show. Well, how many shows are really sold out every single performance? Not many. So that should be a red flag to you. So those are a couple of things. I could probably go on and on and on, but I think it's really important to know that this is a business and not just about a fancy Tony pen or a statue.
That's amazing. And also, just going back, you mentioned priority loan. I didn't even know that was a thing, because I thought if a show wasn't making money, it just closed.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes it will just close. But let's say, for example, your show opens in March and you're already struggling with ticket sales in April, you want to hold on to May to see if you get Tony nominations and see if that will sort of bump up your box office appeal. And so sometimes producers will choose to get a loan, whether it be from an individual, whether it be from a bank. That's basically helping them stay afloat and meet their weekly running costs. Let's say your show costs $500,000 to run each week, but you're only making $300,000 your first couple of weeks. That means you're running at a loss of $200,000 per week. Most shows will have a reserve in the budget, which is sort of money set aside to offset those running losses. But there's only so amount of money there. So it's like, let's say we put aside $1 million for our reserve. Okay, well, you lost $200,000 your first week. So now that reserve is down to $800,000. You've lost another $200,000. You're now down to $600,000. You got 5 more weeks before Tony nominations, but you really only have 3 more weeks of losses, so that's where a loan may come into place to really help offset that. And then if you see the writing on the wall that, oh, you didn't get nominated for Best Musical, or the Tony noms came, but they didn't make a change in the box office, then you have to make a decision to close. And then if the show tours or license or whatever, the first people who are going to get paid back are the people who gave you that priority loan before you pay back the rest of your investors. So it's not an ideal situation. You want to avoid it at all costs if possible. But yeah, it's definitely a real thing.
Wow. Okay. It sounds stressful to me.
It is. And it's something that you can't not think about when you're leading a show.
Wow. Okay. Rashad, this has been amazing. I have one final question for you. But is there anything else you want to talk about producing, or just anything you want to say?
Just that I love it. I love producing. I love being able to create. It's really exciting to walk into a theater with a show that you're really proud of and see how it can change a person seeing it.
That's amazing. That's that optimist in you. I love it. All right. So final question for you. How can people get a hold of you? Where can they get a hold of you? And who do you want to connect with you?
Interesting question. Well, I'm on Instagram. My handle is Rashad V Chambers. V as in Visa, but you can find me online. And who do I want to connect with? Oh, that's a great question. There's so many people that I want to collaborate with. I love to work with Whoopi Goldberg. I love to work with Viola Davis. Honestly, the list goes on and on and on. But yeah, those would probably be the first 2 that come to mind. Both EGOT winners. Maybe they'll rub off on me. I only have the T. So I need the other 3 letters. But yeah, I'm looking to work with really cool people who share my passion and vision for telling great stories.
Amazing. All right. So if either of those people are listening, get a hold of Rashad.
Please.
Amazing. Rashad, I cannot thank you enough for giving me a full hour, especially on a Friday afternoon when everybody just wants to go home or start their weekend. This has been amazing. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you for inviting me. It's been a joy.
That's it for this week's episode. My takeaways are: Rashad is a great combination of knowledge and wise mixed with somebody who loves theater, which means his taste is good theater. This is a fantastic recipe for a producer, and there's so much good theater that's going to happen because of Rashad. I also love how he produces as a job. Yes, he loves it, but also there's a lot that isn't glamorous or fun, but it's part of making the show happen. His advice to producers is invaluable. Stay safe, be responsible, don't sell lies. It's a lot of words of caution, but coupled with being true to yourself so that you can let your energy and drive get you to producing. I love his explanation of what drives shows to Broadway: demand, ego, or talent. Demand makes sense. ego, which is easy to look at and think of as bad, like somebody's vain and they want to be noticed. And that's true, but it's also needed across the board because we all want people to notice and buy tickets so that we can make a living and keep doing it. And talent is, yes, seemingly the least important factor as always, but it's still in there because you can't have a Broadway show without talent. Even if it isn't your favorite show, there is still oodles of talent that make that show happen. And finally, don't be afraid of no. This is across all industries and life. If you want something, you can't be afraid of no. When I think of fundraising, it sounds terrible to me, but as Rashad laid out, it's at least 1/3 of a lead producer's time and 90% of a co-producer's time. So if you have aspirations of producing anything ever, you have to be comfortable with hearing no again and again and again. I love Rashad's take. Am I good at it? Do I enjoy it? Very different questions. A reminder to patrons that you can access that bonus episode called How We Became Co-Producers on Broadway. Find it at patreon.com/artisticfinance. And since we're talking about producers, which I feel like I've said the word producer 700 times in this episode, but since we're talking about it, one of our patrons, Matthew LaBanca, recently found a producer for his one-man show, Communion. It's an amazing story how he found that producer, and we'll be having Matthew on the show to discuss it. He's starting rehearsals soon. Performances for his show start November 7th at the Cell Theater in New York City. If you're going to be in town at that time and you decide to go see it, definitely mention to him that you heard it on here because he'll get a kick out of that, and I also will get a kick out of that. Access that episode early in the patron feed or by signing up to be a patron at patreon.com/artisticfinance. One last thing. If you want to hear a live episode in person, join us December 8th at LDI in Las Vegas. We're recording an interactive episode titled Financial Independence for Creatives. The dad joke to end this episode: how many Broadway producers does it take to change a light bulb? Only one, but it depends on which theater marquee it's in. If the bulb is in the marquee of the James Earl Jones Theater, but the producer's show is in the August Wilson, then that bulb is never going to get changed. That's it for today. Until next time, break a leg.
Thank you for listening to Artistic Finance, where we interview successful artists, leaders, and investors to help educate and inspire the creative community. To access our show notes and resources, go to artisticfinance.com. This show is for entertainment purposes only. Before making any decision, consult a professional. This show is copyrighted by Artistic Finance. Written permission must be granted before syndication or rebroadcasting.